The flowers should not have been there. Commander Serene stopped walking when she saw them. Her silver carapace caught the weak morning light as she stood frozen at the base of the fallen monument. Behind her, dozens of Kalani families waited in silence for the annual remembrance gathering to begin. But Serene could not move, could not speak. Someone had placed offerings at their sacred memorial. The fallen monument rose 40 meters into the gray sky of Asharian Prime. It was built from obsidian mined from this very world, carved with the names of 3,000 Kalani warriors who died crushing humanity's last defensive stand. For 20 years, only Kalani hands had touched this stone. Now, at its base sat impossible things, earth flowers. Real ones, preserved in small stasis cubes that glowed faint blue. Handwritten notes in careful script. Small wooden figures carved to look like Kalani soldiers. And bottles of clean water, precious on this dry and broken world. Serene's mandibles clicked in confusion. Then anger. "Secure the area," she ordered. Her soldiers spread out, weapons drawn. The gathered families began to whisper. Children pressed against their parents, sensing the sudden tension. Elder Vorith approached slowly. He was ancient, his deep blue shell cracked with age, and his left arm was missing from a battle wound that never healed right. He had fought in the war himself, one of the few still alive who remembered it. He knelt beside the offerings and picked up one of the notes. "This is written in our language," he said quietly. "An inhuman." "Read it," Serene demanded. Vorith studied the paper. His old eyes moved slowly across the words. When he looked up, his expression had changed to something Serene did not recognize. It says, "For Warrior Keleth, who sang to himself before the final charge. May your song continue where I cannot hear it." Silence fell over the gathering. Keleth. Serene knew that name. Everyone knew that name. He was a hero of the final battle, one of the first to breach the human lines. "How does a human know he sang?" someone asked from the crowd. Vorith picked up another note. Then another. Each one contained a name, a Kalani name, followed by some small personal detail. One soldier who carried a picture of his children. Another who always checked on his wounded comrades before himself. A young warrior who cried the night before the battle and was ashamed of it. These were not insults. These were memories. "This is a trick," Serene said firmly. "Some human game to mock our dead." "Perhaps," Vorith replied. "Or perhaps not." Lieutenant Cavil, young and eager, pushed through the crowd. He had never seen the war. He only knew humans from the stories, from the histories that described them as violent and treacherous. "Commander, I have accessed the security footage," he announced. "There's a recording from early this morning, before dawn." Serene's eyes narrowed. "Show me." Cavil projected the footage into the air above his wrist device. The gathered Kalani watched in silence, but a figure walked through the pre-dawn darkness. A human. Male. Old. With gray hair and weathered skin. He walked with a limp, favoring his left leg. He carried a small bag over his shoulder. The human approached the monument slowly, as if each step hurt him. He knelt at the base and began placing his offerings one by one. He arranged them carefully, respectfully. Then he stood and faced the monument. He placed both hands flat against the obsidian surface. The crowd gasped. Serene felt her blood turn cold. That gesture. Both hands pressed a stone. It was the Kalani way of mourning. It was how they said goodbye to their dead. No human should know that. No human should dare to use it. The figure in the recording stood there for a long time, hands against the monument, head bowed. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. "Find him," Serene commanded. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "Find this human and bring him to me." "What do you think he wants?" Cavil asked. Serene stared at the offerings. The flowers. The carved figures. The water. "I do not know," she admitted. "But I intend to find out." Elder Vorith was still kneeling among the offerings. He held one of the wooden carvings in his remaining hand. It was small but detailed, showing a Kalani soldier in battle armor. "Commander," he said softly, "I recognize this carving. The armor design, the shape of the helmet. This is from my unit, from the final battle." Serene turned to him. What are you saying? I am saying that whoever made this was there. Vorith looked up at the monument, at the thousands of names carved into its surface. This human watched our soldiers die, and for 20 years, he has been coming here to remember them. Why would an enemy do such a thing? Vorith placed the carving back among the offerings, gently, as if it might break. That, he said, is the question that matters. The wind blew across the barren landscape, carrying dust and silence. The Kalani family stood watching, uncertain what to feel. Their sacred gathering had been interrupted by something none of them understood, a human mourning Kalani dead, an enemy honoring those he helped kill. Serene looked at the monument rising above her, at the names of 3,000 warriors, at the strange offerings left by human hands. She would find this man. She would learn the truth, and then she would decide what to do with him. The settlement had no name. It was just a collection of old buildings on the edge of the wasteland, half buried in dust and forgotten by everyone who mattered. Lieutenant Cavil led his team through the narrow streets as the twin suns began to set. The tracking signals had brought them here, to this place where a handful of humans still lived among the ruins of a war nobody wanted to remember. Are you certain? Cavil asked his scanner operator. The trail ends here, sir. The human we seek is somewhere in this settlement. Cavil looked around at the crumbling walls and rusted metal. He had expected something different, something more threatening. These humans were not warriors. They were survivors clinging to life on a world that did not want them. Spread out, he ordered. Find him. They found the workshop 20 minutes later. That IT was a small building with a broken roof and walls patched with salvaged metal. Light spilled from the open doorway. Cavil approached carefully, weapon ready. Inside, a human sat at a workbench. He was old, with gray hair and deep lines on his face. His hands moved slowly over a piece of wood, carving it into shape with a small knife that he looked up when Cavil entered. His eyes were tired but calm. He did not run. He did not reach for a weapon. I wondered when you would come, he said. Cavil kept his weapon aimed at the human. You are Daniel Webb? I am. You placed offerings at the fallen monument. I did. Behind Cavil, his soldiers filled the doorway. They expected resistance. They expected lies and tricks. This simple honesty confused them. What? Cavil demanded. Daniel set down his carving tool. On the workbench sat dozens of small wooden figures, each one shaped like a Kalani soldier. Some were finished. Some were still rough shapes waiting to be completed. Because someone should remember them, Daniel said. Before Cavil could respond, Commander Serene pushed through the soldiers. She had followed them from the monument, unable to stay behind. She needed to see this human for herself. You dare touch our memorial, she said. Her voice was ice. You dare use our mourning gesture. Daniel stood slowly. His left leg was stiff, and he winced as he put weight on it. Old injury, old pain. I did not mean to offend, he replied. I only meant to honor. Honor. Serene stepped closer, her silver carapace reflecting the workshop's dim light. You killed our people. Your kind murdered thousands. And now you speak of honor. I was a medic, Daniel said quietly. I try to save lives. Both sides. Serene's mandibles clicked in disbelief. You expect me to believe that? Daniel moved to a shelf on the wall. The soldiers tensed, but he only pulled down an old box. He opened it and removed a worn leather journal. In the final battle, the lines broke down. Kalani and human wounded lay together in the mud. I was trained to help the injured, so I helped everyone I could reach. He opened the journal. Inside were drawings, sketches made in charcoal and faded ink. Kalani faces, human faces, notes written in the margins. I learned their names, Daniel continued. The ones who could still speak, they told me about themselves, their families, their homes, their fears. He turned a page and showed Serene a drawing of a Kalani officer. The face was younger, the carapace undamaged, but the features were unmistakable. Serene stopped breathing. This was your father, Daniel said. His name was Vorin. He spoke of you before he died. The workshop fell silent. Cavil watched his commander, uncertain what to do. He had never seen her look so shaken. You lie, Serene whispered. I was with him at the end. He was trapped under rubble. His wounds were too severe. I could not save him. Daniel's voice was gentle, careful. He showed me a hologram of his family, a small female with bright eyes. His daughter, he said, his greatest pride. Serene's hands clenched into fists. The records say he died leading a charge. A hero's death. The records are wrong. How dare you? He died in my arms. Daniel closed the journal. He asked me to tell his daughter something. I have carried those words for 20 years. I never found a way to deliver them until now. Serene stared at this human, this enemy, this man who claimed to have held her father as he died. What words? She demanded. Daniel met her eyes. His expression held no hatred, no fear, only a deep and endless sadness. He said, "Tell my daughter I died thinking of her. Tell her I was not afraid." Serene felt something crack inside her chest. All her life, she had lived with the story of her father's heroic death. She had built her identity around it. She had become a warrior to honor his sacrifice. And now, this human stood before her, offering a different truth. "Take him," she ordered, her voice rough. "Bring him to the monument. The council will decide his fate." Daniel did not resist as the soldiers bound his hands. He only looked at Serene with those tired, knowing eyes. "I am sorry," he said. "I never wanted to cause you pain." Serene turned away. She could not look at him anymore. She needed to think. She needed to understand. But most of all, she needed to decide whether she wanted the comfortable lie or the painful truth. 20 years ago, the world was burning. Young Daniel Webb ran through smoke so thick he could barely see his own hands. Explosions lit the sky in orange and red. The screams of the dying mixed with the roar of weapons fire until everything became one endless wall of noise. He was 28 years old. A field medic. Not a soldier, not really. He carried bandages instead of bigger guns. His job was to keep people alive long enough to fight again. But the human defensive line had collapsed. There was no more fighting. There was only running and dying. Daniel stumbled over bodies. Some human, some Kalani. In the chaos, they all looked the same. Broken shapes lying in the mud and ash. He heard a voice calling out in the darkness. Weak, desperate, Daniel followed the sound. He found a Kalani officer trapped beneath a collapsed wall. The alien's lower body was crushed under rubble. Dark blood pooled beneath him. Daniel's training screamed at him to keep moving. This was the enemy, the creature whose people were slaughtering his friends. He should leave it to die. But Daniel was a medic, and medics helped the wounded. He knelt beside the Kalani. The officer's eyes widened in surprise, then fear. "Human," he gasped. His voice was wet and broken. "I'm not going to hurt you," Daniel said. He examined the injuries quickly. Too much damage. Too much blood lost. There was nothing he could do. The Kalani seemed to understand. His fear faded into something like acceptance. "You are medical." The officer's English was rough, learned from intercepted transmissions. "Yes, a medic. Cannot save me." "No, I am sorry." They stayed there together as the battle raged around them. Two enemies with nothing left to do but wait for the end. The Kalani reached into a pouch on his belt. His movements were slow and painful. He pulled out a small device and activated it. A hologram appeared. A family. A female Kalani with gentle features. Two young ones playing in a garden. And a small girl with bright eyes and silver carapace, looking directly at the recorder with fierce pride. "My family," the officer whispered. "My daughter, Serene." Daniel looked at the hologram, at the small girl who would grow up without her father. "She is beautiful," he said. The officer tried to laugh, but only coughed up more blood. "She is stubborn, strong. She will be warrior someday. Better than me. What is your name?" "Vorin." Daniel took Vorin's hand. The alien's grip was weak, his strength fading with each heartbeat. "I am Daniel." "Daniel." Vorin tested the name. "Human name. Strange sounds. Kalani names are strange to me, too." For a moment, something passed between them. Not friendship, not forgiveness, just understanding. Two fathers, two soldiers, caught in a war neither of them had chosen. "Daniel," Vorin said, "you will survive this?" "I do not know. If you survive, tell my daughter." Vorin squeezed Daniel's hand with the last of his strength. Tell her I died thinking of her. Tell her I was not afraid. I will try. Vorin's eyes drifted to the hologram still glowing above his palm. The image of his daughter, frozen in time, forever young. She has my eyes, he murmured. Same fire inside. Then he was gone. Daniel stayed with the body for a long moment. He reached over and closed Vorin's eyes, the way he would for any fallen comrade. Then he took the hologram device and put it in his own pocket that a promise made. A burden carried. The battle ended 3 hours later. Humanity surrendered. The war was over. Daniel survived, though he never understood why. He walked through the aftermath in a daze, stepping over the bodies of friends and enemies alike. His leg was badly wounded. He would limp for the rest of his life. But he survived it. In the years that followed, he tried to find a way to reach Serene, to deliver her father's last words. But the Kalani did not welcome human contact. The war had poisoned everything between their species. So Daniel did the only thing he could. He returned to Asherian Prime, to the place where Vorin died. He learned the names of other Kalani soldiers who fell that day. He carved their faces from memory. He placed offerings at their monument. It was not enough. It would never be enough, but it was all he had. Now, 20 years later, Daniel sat in a holding cell beneath the fallen monument. His hands were bound. His old leg throbbed with familiar pain. Commander Serene stood on the other side of the bars, staring at him like he was something she could not understand. You kept his hologram, she said finally. Daniel nodded. I tried to return it. I never could. You could have forgotten him. You could have moved on with your life. No. Daniel shook his head slowly. I could not. He trusted me with his last words. A dying man's faith is not something you forget. Serene was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than before. What was he like? At the end, Daniel thought about Vorin, about the fear that became acceptance, about the love that outlasted everything else. He was brave, Daniel said, and he was kind. And his last thoughts were not about the war or the enemy or victory. They were about you. Only you. Serene turned away so Daniel could not see her face, but he heard her crying, and he understood. The transport ship landed hard on Asherian Prime, kicking up clouds of red dust that hung in the thin air like ghosts. Mira Webb stepped out before the engines finished cooling. She was 32 years old, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw. She had traveled for 3 weeks to reach this forgotten world. 3 weeks since her father stopped answering her messages. 3 weeks of silence from a man who called her every Sunday, without fail. She knew something was wrong. She just did not know how wrong until the Kalani soldiers surrounded her ship. Human, the lead soldier said, you are not permitted here. My father is here. Daniel Webb. I need to find him. The soldiers exchanged looks. One of them spoke into a communication device. After a moment, they lowered their weapons. You will come with us, the lead soldier said. The council wishes to speak with you. They brought her to a large tent near the fallen monument. Inside, dozens of Kalani gathered in heated argument. She heard her father's name again and again, spoken like a curse by some and a puzzle by others. Elder Vorith saw her first. He approached slowly, his ancient blue shell catching the light. You are Daniel's daughter, he said. It was not a question. Where is he? What have you done with him? He is safe, unharmed. Vorith studied her face. You look like him. Same fire in your eyes. I want to see him. Soon. First, you must understand what has happened here. Vorith told her everything. The offerings of the monument. The hunt for her father. The story he told about a Kalani officer named Vorin and a promise made on a battlefield 20 years ago. Mira listened without speaking. When Vorith finished, she reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather journal. This is his old one, she said. He kept another after the war. I found them both when I was cleaning his home. Vorith took the journal carefully. He opened it and began turning pages. Each one held drawings. Kalani faces sketched from memory. Notes about names and families and final words. He spent 20 years trying to remember them all, Mira said quietly. He told me once that the worst part of war was not the dying. It was the forgetting. How quickly the dead become numbers instead of people. Your father is an unusual human. He is broken. Mira's voice cracked slightly. The war destroyed him, not because of what your people did to us, because of what we all did to each other. Vorith closed the journal. Why did he come back to this place? Because he could not let go. Because every year on the anniversary of the battle, he would go somewhere quiet and speak the names of people he could not save. Mira wiped her eyes. He needed somewhere to put his grief. Your monument gave him that. On the other side of the tent, Lieutenant Cavill was watching. He had heard everything. He pushed through the crowd until he stood before Mira. Your father presumes too much, he said coldly. He has no right to mourn our dead. He is the enemy. Mira looked at the young Kalani. She saw the anger in his posture, the certainty in his eyes. He had never seen war. He only knew hatred from stories and history books. You were not there, she said. I do not need to have been there. I know what humans did. Do you? Do you know what it feels like to hold someone as they die and realize that they are no different from you? That they have families and fears and dreams, just like you do? Cavill's mandibles clicked in frustration. That does not excuse. My father does not ask for excuses. He does not ask for forgiveness. Mira stepped closer to Cavill. He asks only to remember, to say their names, to prove that their lives mattered to someone. We remember our own dead. Do you? Do you remember them as people? Or do you remember them as heroes and symbols and martyrs? Mira's voice grew sharper. My father remembers them as fathers and brothers and sons. He remembers the soldier who was afraid, the warrior who cried before battle, the officer who showed him pictures of his daughter. Cavill had no answer for that. Commander Serene entered the tent. Her silver carapace was dull, her movements heavy. She had been crying, though she would never admit it. The council has made a decision, she announced. Daniel Webb will face judgment at the monument. The families of the fallen will decide his fate. Mira's heart sank. And if they decide to punish him? Serene met her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he will be punished, Serene said quietly. But they will hear him first. They will know what he has carried for 20 years. It was not justice. It was not mercy. It was something in between. Mira nodded slowly. Can I see him? Before the judgment. Serene hesitated. Then she gestured to one of her soldiers. Take her to her father. Let them have tonight. As Mira followed the soldier out of the tent, she passed Elder Vorith. The old Kalani pressed her father's journal back into her hands. Bring this tomorrow, he said. Let them see what he saw. Mira held the journal against her chest. Tomorrow, her father would stand before the families of the people he had tried to save and failed. Tomorrow, they would decide if his grief was an insult or a gift. She did not know which way it would go, but she would be there beside him, no matter what. 300 Kalani gathered at the base of the fallen monument as the suns rose over Asherian Prime. Daniel Webb stood alone before them. His hands were unbound now, but guards flanked him on both sides. He wore simple clothes, dusty from days in a cell. His gray hair moved in the dry wind. Behind him rose the monument, 40 meters of black stone carved with names. He had memorized many of those names over the years. Now the families behind those names stared at him with anger, confusion, and something that might have been curiosity. Commander Serene stepped forward. Her voice carried across the silent crowd. This human has placed offerings at our sacred memorial. He claims to honor our dead. Today, you will hear his words and decide his fate. She stepped back. The stage was his. Daniel looked out at the sea of Kalani faces. He saw the hatred in some eyes, the grief in others. He saw young ones who had never known the humans their parents described. He saw old ones who remembered the screams and the blood. I am not here to ask for forgiveness, he began. His voice was rough but steady. I cannot undo what was done. I cannot bring back your sons and daughters, your fathers and mothers. The war took them, and nothing I say will change that. A female Kalani near the front shouted at him. Then why are you here? Why do you touch our monument? Because I was there when they died. Because I saw them as more than enemies. Daniel's eyes found the female who had spoken. I was a medic. My job was to save lives. On the last day of the battle, I found myself surrounded by wounded from both sides. I had a choice to make. He paused, letting the words settle. I chose to help everyone I could reach, Kalani and human alike. I held their hands. I learned their names. I listened to their last words. The crowd shifted uneasily. This was not what they expected to hear. Your soldier Keleth, Daniel continued. He sang to himself before the final charge. An old song from his homeworld. He told me it was his mother's favorite. Somewhere in the crowd, a female gasped. Warrior Thesson carried a picture of his children in his armor. He showed it to me before he stopped breathing. He wanted someone to know their faces. Daniel spoke name after name. Each one came with a detail, a memory, a piece of humanity that war had tried to erase. The crowd grew quieter with each story. Some began to cry. I carved their faces because I did not want to forget them, Daniel said. I left offerings because someone should remember that they were more than soldiers. They were people. They loved and feared and hoped, just like all of us. An elderly Kalani female pushed through the crowd. Her shell was pale with age, her movements slow and careful. She stopped directly in front of Daniel. My son died in the battle, she said. Her voice was thin but clear. His name was Voreth. He was 19 years old. Daniel studied her face. Something flickered in his memory. Voreth, he repeated slowly. He was wounded in the chest. He could not speak, but he held my hand very tightly. He looked at me with such fear. The female's eyes filled with tears. He was afraid of the dark, she whispered. Ever since he was small, he always needed light. I stayed with him until the end. I kept talking to him so he would not feel alone. The female reached out and touched Daniel's hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling. Thank you, she said. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This was their enemy. This was the human whose people had brought war to their world. And here he stood, offering them their sons back, piece by piece. Commander Serene stepped forward again. In her hand, she held a small device. A hologram flickered to life above her palm that a younger version of herself smiled at the recorder. Her father stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. This belonged to my father, Serene announced. Daniel Webb kept it for 20 years. He kept it because my father asked him to deliver a message. She looked at Daniel. He looked back at her. My father's last words were not about victory or honor, Serene said. Her voice cracked slightly. His last words were about me, about love, about the things that matter when everything else falls away. She deactivated the hologram and turned to face the crowd. I have spent my life hating humans. I became a soldier to avenge my father's death. But this human, she gestured at Daniel. This human showed me that my father was not a symbol or a hero. He was just a father who wanted to come home. The silence stretched on. Nobody moved. Then, slowly, the elderly female who had lost her son stepped back and lowered her head. The Kalani gesture of respect. Others began to follow. One by one, they lowered their heads. Not all of them. Some still burned with anger and refused to accept what they were seeing. But enough. Enough to change something. Elder Voreth raised his remaining arm. The families have spoken, he declared. Daniel Webb will not be punished. His offerings will remain at the monument. Daniel let out a breath he did not know he was holding. But the moment of peace shattered as quickly as it came, that a roar filled the sky. Everyone looked up, that a Kalani warship descended through the clouds. It was massive, black, and bristling with weapons. That is not one of ours, Cavil said, his voice tight with fear. Serene's face went pale. It is from the homeworld, she said. The collective has sent someone. The ship landed in a storm of dust and fire. Whatever judgment the families had offered, it seemed someone else had other plans. Admiral Torek descended from his warship like a storm given form. His black carapace gleamed in the harsh light. A dozen elite soldiers marched behind him, their weapons ready. He surveyed the gathered crowd with cold, calculating eyes. Commander Serene, he said, I received reports of a human defiling our sacred monument. Explain why he still breathes. Serene stood her ground. The families have rendered judgment, Admiral. They chose mercy. The families do not speak for the collective. Torek's gaze found Daniel in the crowd. This creature placed his filthy offerings at our memorial. He mocked our dead. The punishment is death. He did not mock them, Serene replied. He honored them. Honored, Torek laughed, a harsh sound like stones grinding together. A human cannot honor Kalani dead. A human can only desecrate. He gestured to his soldiers. Seize him. The soldiers moved forward. But before they could reach Daniel, something unexpected happened. Lieutenant Cavil stepped between them. The young soldier who had hated Daniel most now stood as a shield. His weapon remained holstered, but his posture was clear. No, Cavil said. Torek's eyes narrowed. You defy me, Lieutenant. I defend the judgment of the families. This is their monument. They're dead. They have the right to choose. They have no such right. The collective decides what. The collective was not here. Cavil's voice rang out across the silent crowd. He had never sounded so certain of anything in his life. The collective did not hold their dying sons. The collective did not hear their final words. But this human did. Cavil pointed at Daniel. He did what we never could. He remembered them as individuals, not as numbers, not as symbols, as people. Torek looked at Cavil like he was something rotten. You have been corrupted by human lies. I have been shown a truth we were too proud to see. One by one, other Kalani stepped forward. Serene, Vorith, the elderly female who had lost her son. Families who had heard Daniel's stories and recognized their loved ones in his words. They formed a wall between Daniel and the soldiers. Torek surveyed the scene. His mandibles clicked in barely controlled fury. You would die for this human. We would stand for what is right, Vorith answered. His ancient voice carried the weight of decades. The war is over, Admiral. It ended 20 years ago, but our hatred has kept it alive in our hearts. He gestured at Daniel. This man carries no hatred. He carries grief. He carries memory. He carries the names of our children on his tongue and the faces of our loved ones in his hands. Vorith stepped closer to Torek. If we kill him for that, then we prove that humans were right to fear us. We prove that we are exactly what they said we were. Monsters who cannot tell the difference between an enemy and a friend. The wind blew across the gathering, carrying dust and silence. Torek stood very still. His soldiers waited for orders. The crowd waited for violence, but Torek was not a fool. He could see the unity before him. Killing Daniel would mean killing Kalani as well. It would mean slaughter at their own sacred monument. The political cost would be enormous. This matter is beneath the collective's attention, Torek finally said, each word dripping with venom. The human may keep his worthless life, but he is never to return to this world. He turned and marched back toward his ship. His soldiers followed. The crowd exhaled as one. Daniel felt hands steadying him. Mira was there, her face wet with tears. Serene stood nearby, looking at him with something that was not quite forgiveness, but was close to understanding. Thank you, Daniel said to Cavil. The young lieutenant looked uncomfortable. I still do not understand you, human. I do not know if I ever will. That is fair, but I know what you did was not an insult. Cavil straightened his shoulders. It took me too long to see it. The warship rose into the sky and disappeared among the clouds. The threat was gone. For now, in the days that followed, something changed at the fallen monument. Serene commissioned a new stone to stand beside the obsidian tower. Smaller, unmarked except for 4 simple words carved in both languages. For all who fell. Daniel placed his offerings at both monuments now. The flowers, the carved figures, the bottles of water, and slowly, quietly, Kalani families began placing offerings of their own, not at the Victory Monument, at the small stone beside it. Offerings for the humans who died in the battle, for the enemies they had killed and never thought about again. For the other side of grief they had refused to acknowledge. One morning, Daniel arrived at dawn to find an elderly Kalani female waiting for him. She held a small wooden carving in her hands. It was rough and unpracticed, but it was clearly shaped like a human soldier. My husband made this, she said. He fought in the battle. He never spoke about it. But after he heard your story, he could not stop speaking. She placed the carving at the base of a small stone. He said he killed many humans. He never knew their names. He wishes he did. Daniel nodded slowly. Would he like to learn? He would, if you would teach him. Daniel looked at the carving, at the monument, at the Kalani family's gathering in the early light. I would be honored, he said. Mira watched her father from a distance. She saw him sitting with Kalani strangers, sharing stories, trading memories. She saw the walls between species beginning to crack. That it would take time. Generations, maybe. The war had cut too deep to heal quickly. But this was a start. A human who mourned his enemies had taught them something they never expected to learn. That grief does not belong to the victors. That memory is not a weapon, but a bridge. That the dead do not care who places flowers on their graves. Only that someone remembers they existed. The fallen monument still stood, proud and dark against the sky. But beside it, something new was growing. Something strange and fragile and impossibly human. Hope.